Chapter 4. Jolted awake, it was a long time later. The fire was coals now, still glowing red through gray ash as the slight wind blew. Lasoni's eyes were swollen and crusty from the dust kicked up by dancers. As the fuzzy memories of last night slowly came back, Lasoni twisted around. The boy was still holding her, fast asleep. He had protected her all night, and nothing else, just as he had promised. Yep, still cute, Lasoni thought, smiling like an idiot. Staring at his sculpted nose and peaceful face, she reached to touch his cheek, but a sudden pang of nausea twisted her insides. So, carefully, she moved his arm and stood up, the earth tilting slightly underneath her. She had to get away. If she threw up near him, he would wake, maybe find her disgusting. Lasoni followed the curve of tents that encircled the temple, her mouth swimming in saliva. The moon remained full and bright above her, but the sun wouldn't hide forever. This had to happen now, giving her time to freshen up and return to him, if he was still there. Lasoni searched frantically for a discreet spot that wouldn't break any taboos. But out of nowhere, a boisterous pack of drunken males headed towards her, following the curve of the temple. She was alone. It would be her will and word against theirs. Seeing no untied tents or alternatives, she crouched down, lifted the first layer of skin covering the temple, and rolled underneath. Oof, rolling bad. Coming up on her hands and knees, she halted, assessing. It seemed the demands of her stomach might have passed. Oh, thank the her last meal, and that stupid herb poured from her mouth. Spitting away the bile, she yearned for water, but knew it would have to wait. She wiped her lips with the back of a shaky hand and squatted, bracing against the sacred stones. This was worse than what might have happened at the hands of those men. This might get her killed. She had just purged inside the holiest place her people knew of, and the most forbidden. The long legs had strict rules, and as sheets of sweat rolled off her, Lasoni imagined being impaled or bound alive and left for scavengers. The vomiting had sobered her up some, but the twig would help her think much faster, and right now she needed faster. Reluctantly, she reached into her pouch and pulled out a few doses of the tiny bundles, chewing them quickly. Almost instantly, adrenaline sprang into her blood, sharpening her senses. The resulting fibrous mass was impossible to swallow, so the spent twig went into the dirt. Lasoni stood up slowly, hunched over from pain and fatigue, peering into the dark temple. Her eyes were adjusting slowly, but she could make out the gigantic standing stone, which had been carved with what looked like relief of various animals. Jaguars, vultures, wolves, spiders, and yet others she could not identify jutted from the otherwise plain rocks. But amongst the carved animals were other symbols and shapes Lasoni did not recognize, and those were painted on the rough limestone with what looked like blood. Oh, this is not good. No, 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 she whispered, her breath puffs of steam. Prodding from the morning sun forced people out of their tents. She could hear the language of the long legs, with rapid-fire sentences and occasional high-pitched laughter. She must be on the other side of the temple, not ideal. But if she could pass through the temple and exit on the spear side, penalties might be avoided altogether. As she rallied her courage, the familiar clatter of guards and weapons close to the pelt-covered wall startled her into action. Just move, girl. Keep moving, she told herself. But it sounded like Runine's voice coaching her. The interior grew darker as she crept between the silent, scary pillars. It was hard to get a sense of space, or how long it would be till she ran into a wall or a knife. Now she was getting whiffs of last night's ceremonial leftovers, herbs, meat, urine drugs, and apparently ritualistic orgies. The smells cramped her already aching stomach. She considered walking with a finger stuffed in each nostril, Not exactly practical, and the state of her finger hygiene was questionable. Great. Just great. Runine will be right at home here with all this stink, Lasoni thought morosely. Creeping forward, Lasoni passed between the stones of the inner circle, two immense pillars sharing a horizontal capstone. More animals and more strange, dripping symbols adorned their surfaces. Lasoni had never seen the symbols in any spear art, or in the markings left by the Longlegs on the migration routes. The animal reliefs were joined by other carvings on the inner stones. One looked like a basket, but the bottom was square. There was no square in Lasoni's world, except for the occasional odd rock. Next to the basket was a symbol that looked like a star, or perhaps a thistle. Realizing with a start that she was dawdling dangerously, Lasoni pressed deeper into the cold, dark, and smoky interior. A crunching underfoot indicated dry, cut grasses or some other absorbent material. She didn't want to dwell on what it had soaked up last night and kept walking with an outstretched hand just in case. Almost safe. Almost through. Pay attention, she told herself. The twig perhaps a little too much for her heart this early. And on an empty stomach, no less, another of Runine's rules, broken. Her shaky, searching finger met with a waist-high stone altar a moment later. Well, at least she had found the center. Now, Lasoni could follow it around and head straight to the spear side. One side. Good, good. Corner, turn left. Something wet. Ugh. Shuffle, shuffle. At the next corner, okay. Turn left again. Find the halfway and turn around. Okay. Take a deep breath. Calm down, Lasoni. Leaning her butt on the edge of the table, she rested and began formulating the most plausible, forgivable excuse in the history of excuses, just in case she was caught. The weak moonlight sneaking in through cracks in the makeshift roof began shifting slightly towards a golden hue. As the thought of the harsh light of day and all it might expose hammered at Lasoni's frantic brain, a gods be damned rooster crowed. Who brings a rooster to a festival? She swore she would find out, then strangle them and their squawky bird. Or maybe strangle them with their bird. The ridiculous visual made her smile, even amongst all this stress. As she contemplated her revenge, the ambient light jumped up another notch. The spectrum, shifting from cold to warm, nudged the still active herbs inside her, causing Lasoni's vision to sharpen as the shadows receded. The sun. It must have woken up. Soon it will climb over the mountains, bringing day. Can I still make it out in time? With dawn impending, all the sounds she had tuned out while trying to make it around the altar came rushing back to her awareness. More spears talking, laughing with their deep bass. The sharp clatter of firewood dropped, children giggling and running, someone pissing into a pot. And as the two sides met for the morning meal, she heard the woodpecker-like strikes from the talking sticks surrounding the temple. Shit, she hissed, a slight echo of her angered voice ringing off the mighty stones. Not in here, you don't, spear girl. The blood drained from Lasoni's face with a croaking mystery voice, replaced by a clammy sheen of sweaty terror. Shaking from foreboding and dehydration, she tried to become as still and silent as the giant pillars. Clamping her eyes shut, she made a childish wish for invisibility. But instead, a casual slurping sound came from the voice's direction. Expecting an arrow or a knife to pierce her at any moment, Lasoni turned her head to the right, opening her eyes with sheer dread. About 20 paces away, an ancient-looking, skinny medicine woman sat on a straw mat, sipping a steamy concoction from a boiled hide cup. Lasoni locked nervous eyes with the apparent great-great-grandmother crone. She assumed it was her eyes. It was hard to tell through all the wrinkles. As more sunlight filtered through the cracks and crevices, Lasoni realized others were lying about the temple. More long legs, wheezing, sleeping, snoring, and coughing. Lasoni raised a shaking finger to her lips and made a silent shushing gesture. Her other hand waved the universal, "Please don't tell," pantomime. The elder gave a single amusing snort, puffing the steam from her drink with an ancient and no doubt gnarly breath. Lasoni fully expected the crone to start squawking like that rooster. Lasoni was already nostalgic for her earlier, blessedly straightforward escape route. She mentally counted the paces to the hide-covered reed wall. In less than a second, she could be there, roll under, and, God's willing, blend into the crowd. If she were caught, Lasoni knew the outcome would be dire. But at the very least, Runine could help her survive out in the wilderness as an outcast. She would be alive, and that would have to be enough. Steeling her muscles and stomach, she ground her feet through the litter, anchoring them against solid earth for a slip-proof start. Trembling, she looked back at the woman, assuming that her call for the temple guards would initiate a sprint. Apparently, very not that. The old woman simply resumed sipping her tea and scratching a bony hip. But in the seeming indifference of her stoic face, the crone's tiny eyes smiled at Lasoni, twinkling. Behind the elder, a man grunted and, sitting up, threw off a fur blanket with an obnoxiously loud yawn. An unclaimed fart sounded from the depths of the human dog pile, making the man wince. As he rubbed his eyes, the crone simply smiled and shrugged, as if she too were caught in the same tedious predicament as Lasoni. Even more disturbing than this development was the raucous, nerve-jarring sounds of more warriors, craftspeople, traders, cooks, and the smell of breakfast. Lasoni hesitated too long, and now a stealthy exit was impossible. Her only hope was being escorted from the temple by someone with some clout, as she had none. I can leave. I will leave. Just get me outside past the warriors," Lasoni whispered. The man behind the crone blew snot out of one nostril, wiped it on his sleeve, and cleared his throat. His eyes were wide open now and fixed on Lasoni. However, the crone spoke, as all the medicine keepers were equal in this temple. "Tell me, girl, how did you get past the wards?" "I don't understand. What is a warriors?" Lasoni said with her thick, chunky spear accent. Of course, she had left her speaking stick back in her mother's tent. She had never imagined meeting the boy, let alone one she liked, or desecrating a sacred temple, two situations that might require a little advanced vocabulary. The crone laughed loudly, her voice sharp and off-putting, like a goat giving birth. "What exactly is this girl in front of me?" the elder mused, taking a sip to warm her mouth. "Wards are symbols, seals," the crone said, waving her head towards the gruesome red paintings on the standing stones. Had Lasoni missed a blatant "keep out" pictograph on the massive pillars? It had been very dark. "It's not for the eyes," the crone said, reading her face. "They're like clear smoke you can't see. She continued, explaining the world of a seasoned medicine keeper to the bewildered, ignorant spear girl. "Like the shield of a warrior, but made of water, yeah," the crone said, striking her left forearm with her right hand. Lasoni was just as lost as a second ago, fear now climbing up her spine as she strained to understand. She had no idea what this woman was talking about, but she was done for if she had broken some unseen magical ward of the Longlegs. Lasoni had clammed up, so the crone huffed, then continued. "Only a pathfinder, a navigator, can enter this inner temple. The ward shields will only let medicine keepers pass. We alone can worship at the altar, and only we can journey beyond," the crone said, sweeping her arms up, indicating the entire temple and sky. "So the fact that you are here means you are a navigator. Only a navigator is trained to pass through the wards, and you are obviously not trained. The only other entity that would dare break the invisible seals and have the power to do so would be, well, a demon. You see my confusion, young one? Lasoni had never heard that word, navigator, and was unsure what it implied. Still, she knew full well what happened to anyone accused of possession. No, I mean, how would I prove that I'm not a demon? Please, I just want to get back to my mother. She proved to me or you. Demons love taking over the bodies of young girls. I am probably speaking to it right now, and your spirit is off who knows where, the elder frowned. Lasoni didn't know how to answer or defend against such an accusation. She had always thought of demons as perverse entities that infected the weak, sick, or criminal through orifices or wounds. Or maybe she didn't believe in them at all. She wasn't sure. But she knew, without a doubt, that she was herself, just Lasoni. I could partake of the sacrament again, the old medicine keeper postulated with a sigh. Use the herbs to reveal the truth, but I am too tired. And the truth is, I am ready for death. How do you like that? Not what you expect that from an old woman, I am sure. But I make no deals with your kind. There is no darkness I cannot fight my way back from, so you are too late. You hear me, the crone said. I'm not a demon. The sage woman smirked and blew on her tea. Oh, she already knows this, Lasoni realized, even more confused. Yes, the crone concurred. I didn't, Lasoni began, but stumbled over the fact that the old woman had apparently just heard her thoughts. As I said, you belong here, but being here as you are is impossible. That means we have some catching up to do. This means that you were a navigator before you were born, and I insult you. You will know this later, but right now I must apologize, the elder said, bowing her head slightly. What was happening right now? Was she toying with Lasoni? Did she plan to turn her into a hapless sacrifice to appease the law, tribes, and gods in one convenient, gory ritual? The sweat burst from the palms of her clenched fists, forcing Lasoni to wipe them on her tunic. Easy, easy, girl. You are safe for now. So take that bundle and touch it to the coals on the cook fire there. Yes, good. The elder said as Lasoni complied, not knowing what else to do. Soon, the smell of tobacco and aromatic herbs wafted across the temple. Now, focus on the altar and you tell us what you see. This distracted Lasoni, calming her nerves enough to let her shoulders slump. I see the sacraments, the mushrooms, and the prickly ones. Cactus. Tastes nasty, the crone said, shaking from her tongue's bitter memory like a wet dog. I've tasted worse, came another ancient voice from the back. Aye, shut up, the medicine woman barked, eliciting half-intoxicated laughs, grumbles, and concurrences. It was evident that the girl could not identify every flora and fauna, although she clearly had some experience. The old woman leaned back, uncertain if she was about to be attacked or blessed. Choose one. Just one. Choose? I can't. This is your law, Lasoni replied, her nerves prickling. Ha! You are far beyond laws of woman or man, even the gods for that matter. Oh, girl, you still don't understand. You don't remember who you are, the woman said, finally standing up. But you must choose anyway. My old nose smells fresh meat cooking outside. The others are up, regardless. If you are not leaving here as you came in. But the dead or alive part is up to you. So pick one. Decide. After that we can... Suddenly, the animal hides on one of the entrances flew open. A fat, boisterous shaman stumbled past the outer stones, wiping alcohol and grease from his matted beard. Chuckling from some private joke, he swayed like a toddler, looking into the temple and straight at Lasone. His mouth dropped open as he pointed, looking incredulously at his fellow practitioners. "What is this? A spear? A spear girl?" he said, his voice twisting and rising to a comical high note. Frozen in place, he was unwilling to enter further into what might be an energetic trap. "Calm yourself and your voice," the woman hissed, throwing the cup, hot tea and all, in his direction. But it was too late. Passing temple guards rushed in, slamming into his back, clogging the dark entryway. They could technically breach the wards to protect the tribe's secrets without offending the gods. Still, a miscalculation could bring punishment, as with so many decisions amongst superstitious people. The guards felt pressure on their backs as concerned, curious, and reactionary onlookers formed a loose mob at the entrance. All other options were gone. Lasone's fate would be decided here and now. "Who is in there? Who invades the temple and disgraces my tribe?" The deep, sandpapery voice of the Spear clan's chief was reverberating from behind the guards. It had always been reassuring to her growing up, but now seemed dangerous and clipped in anger. Oh, how he yearned to rush in and bludgeon someone to death. Anyone would do. He was a warrior, after all. "She is a navigator, a medicine keeper. She has forgotten, that is all," the crone called back. The priest that stopped at the entryway raised a finger, shaking his head. "No, no. She is a spear. This defilement will rain curses on us all. Sick animals, empty cookpots, droughts. We will pay the price for countless seasons. You all know I speak the truth. This damage is done. Now only a sacrifice can—" "Lasone, baby, it is me," her mother yelled over the shoulders of the annoyed and hungover crowd. "Mama," Lasone answered, scared to get her hopes up for any sort of rescue. But perhaps her mother could beg for her life or trade food or sex for forgiveness. "Right outside, you come. Come to me. Face the chief," Lasone's mother hollered, clawing at the backs of the human wall. Her mother feared that Lasone would not live out the day. Now she would have no grandchildren to marry off or use for bartering. That also meant it was more important to save face than waste energy and resources trying to save her doomed daughter. Lasone took a few steps towards the entrance, but the shaman's hand inched toward his ritual dagger, and she stalled. "Choose already, I am hungry," a woman's voice bellowed, half asleep on the floor, despite the ensuing chaos. Tears streamed down Lasone's cheeks, pulling her face paint with them. Staring at the table, she was once again overwhelmed by choice. There were just too many herbs, roots, leaves, animal parts, and insects. The sheer variety alone was enough to make her pass out. How do you choose the most important and sacred? Wouldn't any choice exclude the others, insulting their essence, their purpose? She tried to sense the correct item, hovering a shaky hand over each basket, bowl, and pile of strange exotic ingredients. Honestly, she felt nothing until she got to a very peculiar container. It was a fist-sized cup, carved from something that she could not identify as stone, wood, or bone. The symbols adorning its polished exterior were even more confusing. Similar to the strange images from the pillars, inside the vessel was a handful of smooth, small, jet-black somethings. Lasone didn't see any legs, so the mystery substance wasn't beetles or bugs. They had to be nuts, seeds, or grains. She started moving her hand over the cup with a flattened palm and splayed fingers. To Lasone's astonished eyes, the cup of mystery herbs began to shimmer, giving off a faint cobalt blue glow. The crone gasped as various cuss words and exclamations sounded from the onlookers. Apparently, the medicine keepers saw the light as well, but their attention was redirected from Lasone as an unholy scream emanated from outside the temple.